So we learned that we have different account types in GitHub, basically the personal user account and the organizational account, which will be the two accounts of interest here for us as part of this course. I'm back here on the GitHub profile, on my GitHub profile, where we added this GitHub Basics repository. And in this profile, and of course also in your profile, you can always check what account type you have inside your profile here. You can do this by accessing your, personal account settings here to the right. In there, we go to the settings option down here. And in this menu now, we go to organizations, this option here. In there, you can now see that we are currently not a member of any organizations. We could create a new organization right here with this button here. And additionally, we can also see that we could turn our current account, our current personal account, as we can see it up there, into an organizational account. This is something we'll explore a bit later in this module, as we first want to focus on to the personal user account that we have, as this is also the default account you typically create when creating a GitHub account. Now, besides these different accounts, we also saw that we have different repository types in GitHub. We can have a private repository or a public repository. Now, at the moment, if we check our current repositories, also available here in this menu, so this option, you see that we have one repository down here, our GitHub Basics repository, and we can now access this repository from here, which brings us directly to the repository. Alternatively, we could of course also access our starting page once again, then access the repository right here, which would redirect us to the same, menu in the end. Inside this repository, we have all our code. We are in this code ribbon here with the different branches, at the moment only with the master branch, and the actual data, the actual code inside this repository. But to the right here, we have this settings option. If we click onto this, you, don't see a lot of options right here at the start. But if we scroll down now, and important, we are still in this options menu inside our settings. But if we scroll down, we see some other features not too important at the moment for us. But down here, we have the so-called danger zone. Now, the danger zone, highlighted with this red border here, already indicates that we have to be a bit careful when changing things right here. For example, we could delete the repository. We saw this already in the last course module. But more importantly, in our case here is that we can also change our repository visibility. At the moment, this repository is a public repository. This means anybody, with a GitHub account or even without a GitHub account, so anybody accessing our user profile on GitHub can access this repository. What does access mean here though? Well, for this, I'll now take the URL of my GitHub account. So it's this first part right here. You can do the same for your account, of course, now. So I copied that. Now I'll open a new browser. I'll use the Edge browser here because here in the Chrome browser, I am logged in with my, current account. So here I am on Google, now in the Edge browser. There, I'll now paste the URL of my GitHub account. You do the same for your account and will access this page now. And as you can see in here, let me zoom in a bit, twice, you see that we have now my user account in here. So it's basically an account created for course purposes, to be honest. But in this account, we see that we have, one popular repository and basically one repository only. We can also access this from here. And there you see, this is our GitHub Basics repository. If I now access this, you see I basically got the same options that we have on the logged in page. Of course, we don't have options like the settings menu here, but generally we can see that we have the code ribbon here, we have the branch access, and we can dive into the actual code, the actual data inside this branch. If we go back to the code here, we can also select the code button and there, well, clone our repository as we also learned it in the last course module. So this means from an access perspective, anybody on the web can access our GitHub profile here and then access all our public repositories. He can clone the code, check it, work with it. We'll of course also explore whether we can also add or commit changes. This is something I'll postpone a bit at this stage of the course, but from a pure access perspective, public repositories are public. Things look a bit different if we turn our repository into a private repository though. For this, I'll switch back to the, well, logged in account in my Chrome browser. Here I am, back in the danger zone. And in there, I'll now change the visibility by clicking onto this button here. We also get a warning right here that if we change the repository visibility, that this could be a potentially destructive action. This is related to the fact that private repositories, for example, have some fewer options for some users when comparing it to public repositories, or that if we turn a public repository to a private one, that, well, any public pages will not be available anymore. So this is kind of logic, I would say, but it's important to keep in mind that if you change the repository visibility, that this has an impact on, well, the accessibility of your code in the end. In our case, we don't have any kind of, well, real project running here, so we can simply select the Make Private option. Here you again get the warning that you will permanently lose all pages published from this repository. So this means, for example, if a website uses public GitHub code, well, then this code will no longer be available. But as I said, this does not affect us right here. So to confirm this visibility change, we should now type the user account name and the repository name. I'll do the shortcut here and simply copy paste this and then confirm that I understand that this will change the visibility. So let's do this now. Now this is done. So this means if we now change back to our Edge browser where we are not logged in into GitHub and reload this page here, then you see we get a 404 error. This page is no longer available because we now turned our public repository into a private one. And if I would now delete the repository name from the URL and now access this page, you see that no repositories, no public repositories are available right here. This means you can still have your user profile and things like that, but only public repositories will be visible right here, also for potential employees if you would like to show your portfolio page on your GitHub page here. So this is how private and public repositories work from a visibility perspective and how you can control which code should be accessible by anyone and which code should not be accessible. Important though, if we again go back to the logged in profile in the Chrome browser and scroll down to the danger zone, then we get the information that our repository is now a private one, but we can of course change the visibility back to the public repo by clicking on to change visibility, making it public up here, and now again enter our account name and the repository name, and with that change it so we are back in the public repository now. Besides these two repository types, the public and the private one, you might also read about internal repositories. These are again related to enterprise accounts though, and therefore not the core focus of this course. Nevertheless, besides the accessibility, so the code accessibility of the private and public repositories that we saw right here, we also want to explore more. This means besides the fact that we can access the code in a public repository, for example, can we also change the code and push new commits to this repository? That's something we'll explore now in the next lecture.